Vince is a very interesting person. When people would ask me that question, you know, a lot of people are very bitter with their treatment and the things that Vince did from a business perspective. I always said Vince was a very shrewd businessman, and it's true. Um, there were oftentimes Vince would make promises to people and then not fulfill the promise. You know, he would go back and do something else. But if you really look at the wrestling business and you understand how it works, you realize, you know, Vince could make a promise to somebody one day and then literally some things happen in the company that changes the direction overnight, that forces them to have to change direction overnight. And they don't share all this information with all the boys. They kind of keep their cards close to the vest. They don't want to let too much information out. But in that way, there were lots of times when Vince would seemingly go back on promises, and that's where people would get pissed off. I was one of them. He basically, the way I saw it, he was promising me a big push right before the Triple H thing started. But then, it just happened the way it did, and then I kind of got all bent out of shape about it and didn't handle it right. And then I went right back to doing what I was doing before that, which was putting over all the new heels that came in. So I got really frustrated and basically talked myself out of the company. But you see why a lot of guys get very angry and bitter over it, but if you really understand what's going on, you understand how Vince works. He is a genius. I wouldn't necessarily say an evil genius. I would say he's a genius. He's obviously made the professional wrestling business what it is today, and he has survived a lot of nuclear bombs against his company, and still he has always survived. So regardless of what anybody wants to say bad about him, he was a very shrewd businessman, but he was a genius, is a genius. He just did what he had to do for his company, and that's it. See, during this time, as I said before, I was irrational, and I was still having these meetings at TV with Vince. I would demand having a meeting with him, and he would meet with me, but he would always have Jerry Briscoe sitting next to him, like he was worried that I was going to try to do something. I don't think I was that irrational, but I was just pissed off, and I always felt like I could speak my mind to Vince because of the way I walked up to him and just spoke to him when I got my job, Mm-hmm. So because of that, I felt like I could always just talk to him, and you got to be careful the way you do that. And there was a moment I'll never forget, and I've told this story before. There was a moment where I was just really frustrated, and they were beating me. I think it was around the time where Mankind beat me on TV, and I don't remember who else. And then eventually T.L. Hopper beat me. And I just went to Vince. I stood right in front of him with Jerry Briscoe standing next to him. I said, if you're not going to use me any better than this, just send me home because I'm sick of it. And Vince kind of looked at me like I was crazy. One of the big rules in wrestling is don't ever take yourself out of the game. And I was basically doing that right in front of him. I was taking myself out of the game. And he came up with a different option. He said, how about if I send you to work in Memphis, Tennessee for a while, which is kind of a demotion. But the funny thing about it is he offered to pay me like $1,000 a week, which was way more than I was making at that time because I was barely on TV and I wasn't on the road. So I was like, that sounds great. I'd love to do it as long as you put it in writing. And I think that was the thing that killed me. As soon as I said that, he had this look on his face. And he didn't say anything. He said, yes, of course. But then I think at the next TV, he sent Briscoe into supposedly. See, I don't even know if this is for sure, but Briscoe came up to me in the locker room. He said, Vince said you can go ahead on home. And I think we were in like Vancouver. And I remember because I was hanging with Austin. I remember we went to the hotel that afternoon, and I shaved the rest of the hair off of my head, and we just got drunk. And I hung around, I think, an extra day, just laying by the pool drunk. And then the day after that, I got on the plane home and didn't look back. But that's how it happened. And I don't even know if Vince really told Briscoe that, because it was weird. Later on, I had guys calling me saying, dude, you were booked to be in Europe. You're on the booking sheet. So, maybe Briscoe just came up and took it upon himself to send me home without Vince's okay, or maybe Vince never even said that. And, these are all things I would think about later on, but that's how it went down. I kind of tried to make a stand, and Vince basically, or the office in general, they just called me on it and said, well, okay, go ahead on home. And you don't realize how horrible of a feeling that is. When Briscoe said you can go ahead on home, I ain't gonna lie, man, I choked up a little bit. I mean, I kept my shit together. I didn't cry in front of him or nothing, but I felt this feeling, sinking feeling in my gut, because I realized, holy shit, it's probably over. And then that's when I started really getting drunk and messed up on drugs. But that's how it all went down, man.